That is for being in our neighborhood, sweetheart." The sound of his hand striking her backside echoed in the quiet, sun-drenched street. A sharp, ugly crack that was louder than a gunshot. The red silk of her dress rippled from the impact. He thought she was just another pretty thing to be played with, a toy to be broken. He never imagined that the hand he'd just slapped belonged to the woman who would single-handedly dismantle his entire corrupt world before we dive into this. Let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from and make sure you subscribe, because you will not want to miss how this story ends. The mid-afternoon sun beat down on the pristine, manicured lawns of the Maplewood Estates enclave, a neighborhood so wealthy it seemed to hum with the silent thrum of money. Here the grass was an impossible shade of green, the hedges were sculpted into perfect geometric shapes, and silence was the most valued commodity. It was into this sterile perfection that Agent Victoria James walked, a vibrant slash of crimson against a beige canvas. Her dress, a simple slip of red silk, clung to her frame, outlining a figure that was both powerful and elegant. Her high heels clicked a confident rhythm on the immaculate sidewalk. The only sound to break the suburban tranquility she was moving into the minimalist glass-walled house on the corner. A detail that had not gone unnoticed. A police cruiser, a standard Ford Explorer, slid to the curb beside her with a lazy, predatory grace. It did not use its siren or lights. It did not need to. Its mere presence was a statement of authority. In a place like this, the passenger side window hummed down, revealing the face of Sergeant David Morgan. He was a man in his early 40s, with a face that looked like it was carved from a block of granite and left out in the sun too long. His eyes, hidden behind reflective aviator sunglasses, raked over Victoria's body from her high heels to the soft curls of her dark hair. "Well, what do we have here?" Morgan's voice was a low drawl, thick with unearned confidence. "A little lost, are we?" The back door of the cruiser opened, and two other officers climbed out, positioning themselves on the sidewalk to block her path. Officer Michael Brown was a bull of a man, his uniform straining at the seams across his broad chest and thick neck. He said nothing, simply cracking his knuckles and grinning. The other officer, Jason Miller, was younger, leaner, with a wheezy face and an eagerness to please his superior. "Looks like one of those influencers, Sarge," Miller chirped. His eyes, wide and hungry, came to take pictures for her feed. Victoria stopped her posture, relaxed, but her eyes, the color of dark, polished obsidian, were sharp and assessing. She gave them a cool, level look, betraying nothing of the calculations running through her mind. "I am not lost. Officers, I live here." She gestured with a slight nod toward the house. The three men exchanged a look, a silent, mocking conversation passing between them. Morgan let out a short, ugly laugh. "You live here, honey. The maids and gardeners in this neighborhood do not even live here." He took off his sunglasses, hooking them onto his uniform shirt. His pale blue eyes were cold and dismissive. "So why do not you tell us the real story? Visiting your sugar daddy, the old man in the glass house finally traded in his wife for a newer model. The casual racism, the blatant sexism. It was exactly what the file had suggested, but reading about it and standing in the heat of it were two different things. Victoria's FBI training kicked in, a calm, cold wave that washed over the initial spark of anger. Observe, analyze, do not react. "I am not sure I understand the question," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "I am a new resident. My name is Victoria James. Now, if you will excuse me, the movers are waiting." She made to step around them, but Brown shifted his bulk, blocking her again. "Not so fast," Morgan said. Getting out of the car, he walked with a swagger, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol. "We have to be careful about who is in our neighborhood. Got to maintain a certain standard. You understand?" He circled her slowly, like a shark inspecting its prey. The smell of cheap coffee and stale doughnuts clung to him. A pretty thing, like, "You dressed like that in a neighborhood like this, it raises questions. People might get the wrong idea. The only people getting the wrong idea right now are you, Sergeant Victoria," said her tone still even, but with a new edge of steel. "You are harassing a citizen." Miller snickered. "Harassing, ma'am. We are just making friendly conversation. Community policing, you know." He made a grand, sweeping gesture with his hand that lingered a little too long on the curve of her hip. "We are just trying to figure out what business a woman like you has in a place like this." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and loaded. A woman like you. It was the cornerstone of their entire world view. She saw it in their eyes and the curl of their lips to them. A black woman of her beauty and of poise in this neighborhood could only be one thing, a commodity, a plaything, something bought and paid for the possibility that she could have earned her place here through her own merit. Did not exist in their small, hateful world. "My business," Victoria said, her eyes locking with Morgan's, "is my own. And right now my business is getting into my house. You are detaining me without cause." Morgan's smile widened, a predatory baring of teeth. He enjoyed this, the power, the intimidation. He stepped closer, invading her personal space until she could feel the heat radiating off his body. Detaining. "Oh no. Sweetheart, we are just having a chat, and we will be done." When I say we are done, his gaze dropped from her eyes down the column of her throat, lingering on the way, the red silk draped over her chest. Or maybe he added his voice, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We are just getting started." The threat was clear, the air thick with it. This was not about policing. This was about power, and they were about to make a very public, very ugly demonstration of it. "You seem to think you have a choice in this matter." Morgan's voice was a low growl, laced with the smug certainty of a man who had never been told. "No. Let me be clear around here. I am the law." He took another step, closing the final gap between them. The sun was hot on Victoria's skin, but the born chill in Morgan's eyes was colder than any winter morning. She stood her ground, a statue of defiance carved from flesh and bone, her spine a rod of steel beneath the soft silk. Brown shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the leather of his duty belt creaking. He was enjoying the show. A silent, menacing spectator. Miller, ever the sycophant, took his cue from his sergeant. "Yeah, lady, you should show some respect. We are just looking out for the neighborhood." He licked his lips, his gaze crawling over her body in a way that made her skin feel grimy. Would not want any undesirable elements moving in. The hypocrisy was suffocating. They spoke of standards and respect while behaving like alleyway thugs. Victoria's mind, a finely tuned instrument of analysis and strategy, was already 10 steps ahead. She could end this, now a precise strike to Morgan's throat, a disarm and elbow to Brown's ribs. She could have all three of them on the ground before they knew what hit them. Her training screamed at her to neutralize the threat. But her mission whispered a different command. This was not a street fight. This was an infiltration. These three were just the gatekeepers to a much deeper rod. Taking them down here now would be a victory, but it would cost her the war. She needed them to expose themselves to lead her into the heart of their corrupt kingdom, and for that, she needed to play the victim. "There is no need for this," she said, allowing a carefully measured tremor to enter her voice. "I am not looking for any trouble." Morgan's grin turned venomous. "Oh, I know you are not." "Darling, trouble is what found you." He looked over his shoulder at his men. "See, boys, she is—" "See, boys," starting to understand. He turned back to Victoria, his eyes glinting with a cruel light. You see, we run a tight ship in Maplewood Estates. We know everyone, and we do not know you. So until we are satisfied you are a person of interest, a very interesting person. His hand came up, and for a second Victoria thought he was going to touch her face instead. He let his knuckles graze the silk over her shoulder. The fabric was thin, and the contact felt like a brand. "This is nice," he said, rubbing the material between his thumb and forefinger. "Must have cost a pretty penny." "Did he buy it for you, or did you just use his credit card?" "That is enough," Victoria said, her voice dropping the false tremor. Gone replaced by a low, warning tone. The shift was too subtle for them to understand. They only heard a challenge. Morgan laughed, a harsh, grating sound that startled a flock of birds from a nearby oak tree. "Enough, honey. I will tell you when it is enough." He took a half-step back, creating a space for his next move. His eyes met hers, full of malice and a perverse sense of entitlement. He was going to make a point. He wanted to humiliate her, to put her in her place, to show her, and any unseen curtain twitching neighbors exactly who was in charge. He was telegraphing the move, but Victoria forced herself to remain still. She saw the tightening of his shoulder, the slight shift in his hips, the flicker of intent in his eyes. Her body screamed to react, to pivot, to block, but her mind, cold and calculating, held it in check. Let him do it. Let him cross the line so completely, so irrevocably, that there would be no coming back. Let him give her the ammunition she needed. The world seemed to slow down. The hum of a distant lawn mower, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the pounding of her own heart in her ears. Morgan's hand swung in a wide, deliberate arc. It was not a casual touch. It was a statement, an act of ownership, a violation meant to strip away her dignity in broad daylight. Then came the crack, sharp, loud, and obscene. The sound of his hand connecting with her backside, the impact sent a jolt through her. Not of pain, but of pure, white-hot fury. The red silk of her dress, a symbol of her confidence and beauty, was now the backdrop for his degradation. "That is for being in our neighborhood, sweetheart," Morgan said. His voice laced with triumph. He looked at his men, who were now openly laughing. Brown clapped his hands together in mock applause, while Miller let out a whooping cheer. Victoria did not move. She stood perfectly still as the laughter echoed on the pristine street. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread across her skin, but beneath it something else was crystallizing. A cold, hard certainty. They thought they had just put a woman in her place. They had no idea they had just declared war on the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She slowly turned her head, her obsidian eyes meeting Morgan's. There was no fear in them, no tears, no submission. There was only a promise of a reckoning so thorough and so devastating that they would curse the day they ever laid a hand on her. The line had been crossed, and now the game would begin on her terms. The laughter died in Miller's throat as he met Victoria's gaze for a fleeting second. The young officer saw something in her eyes that made the hairs on his arms stand up, a chilling placidity, the unnerving calm of a storm's eye. But the moment passed, and Morgan's boisterous voice filled the void. "What's the matter, Cat? Got your tongue?" He swaggered back, admiring his handiwork. "Or did I finally knock some sense into you?" Victoria took a slow, deliberate breath. The picture of a woman gathering her composure after a profound shock inside. However, her mind was a whirlwind of activity. The assault was now federal. Harassment had escalated to battery. They had just handed her probable cause on a silver platter. Her mission parameters had shifted in an instant. The long, slow game of infiltration was over. It was time for Phase 2. "You are assaulting me," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was a statement of fact, Not an accusation. Morgan scoffed. Assault, that was a friendly little pat. A welcome to the neighborhood gesture. You should be thanking me, he winked at Brown. Some women pay good money for that kind of attention. I want your badge numbers, Victoria said, her tone flat and official. All three of you. This new tactic seemed to amuse them more than anything. Miller looked at Morgan, eyebrows raised in a, "Can you believe this expression?" Morgan just shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. Oh, a fighter, I like that. He stepped forward again, reaching for her. Listen, sweetheart, you do not get to make demands here. You are in our world now, and you will do not touch me again, Victoria said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the air like a razor's edge. This time all three of them heard the change. The victim was gone. Morgan's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of irritation. His authority had been challenged, and his fragile ego could not tolerate it. Or what you going to call the police? He gestured around at his two officers. Honey, we are the police. It was their favorite joke. The punchline to 1. Susundant acts of petty tyranny. Fine, Victoria said, taking a small step back. She held her hands up in a gesture of surrender. That was anything but. You want to do this? Let's do this. Her eyes scanned the street. She noted the position of the sun, the reflective surfaces of the windows in the neighboring houses, the Ring doorbell camera on the porch across the street. She was building a case in real time, Morgan misinterpreting her compliance as fear regained his swagger. That's more like it. Now you are going to turn around, put your hands behind your back, and we are going to have a little conversation about vagrancy and soliciting in a residential neighborhood. Soliciting, the word was absurd, but it was the charge. They would use it. It was always the charge they used against women who did not bow to them. That is right, Miller piped up, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt with an exaggerated flourish. Walking around dressed like that. You are practically advertising. Victoria knew this was the critical, moment. Every instinct, every fiber of her being wanted to fight, but her objective was bigger than personal vindication. She had to see how deep this went. She had to let them lead her into the belly of the beast. So with a resolve that felt like swallowing broken glass, she slowly turned around, presenting her back to them. It was the most difficult, most calculated act of her career. She felt the whispers of her instructors in her ears. An agent's greatest weapon is not her gun, but her mind control. The narrative the neighbors, who had undoubtedly been watching from behind their pristine curtains, would see a woman complying with police. They would see her being arrested. The narrative for now was hers to shape. Miller stepped forward eagerly, grabbing her wrists with rough, meaty hands. The cold, cheap metal of the handcuffs bit into her skin as he cinched them down deliberately, making them too tight. The click of the lock was a definitive metallic sound that echoed in the quiet street. So tough. Now are you? Miller sneered, his breath hot and sour near her ear. He shoved her forward toward the cruiser. Morgan held the back door open. Welcome to Maplewood Estates hospitality, he drawled, as she was pushed into the cramped, stifling heat of the back seat. Victoria caught her own reflection in the polished black paint of the door. She saw a beautiful woman in a stunning red dress, her hands cuffed behind her back, being forced into a police car like a common criminal. The image was one of degradation and helplessness. But Victoria saw something else. She saw a predator luring its prey into the den. They thought they had captured her in reality. She had just captured them. The car door slammed shut, plunging the back seat into shadow, and the engine roared to life. They were driving her away from the scene of the crime, and she was bringing the crime scene with her, every word they said from this point forward. Every action they took was now evidence, and the star witness was sitting right in their back seat. The back of the cruiser smelled of stale sweat, cheap air freshener, and the faint metallic tang of fear. The partition separating Victoria from the front was a thick, scratched-up sheet of plexiglass, muffling the officer's conversation into a low, rumbling murmur. Miller had gotten in the back with her, a clear violation of protocol, but protocol was a concept these men treated as a suggestion. At best, he sat beside her, his thigh pressing against hers, his presence a constant suffocating weight. "So what is your name again?" Morgan's voice crackled through the small speaker grill in the partition. "We need it for the report." Jane Doe, soliciting, "My name is Victoria James," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Victoria," Morgan repeated, drawing the name out. "Exotic." "I will bet your real name is something like Destiny or Chantel, right?" Brown in the passenger seat chuckled. "Nah." "Sarge, she is a diamond, I can feel it." The casual, constant stream of racism was exhausting, but Victoria filed it away every slur. Every stereotype was another brick in the wall of charges she was building against them. Miller leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Meant only for her. "You could make all this go away. You know, we do not have to go all the way downtown. We could find a quiet spot. Have a little chat. Come to an understanding." His hand moved, resting on the seat, inches from her thigh. The implication was as ugly as it was unmistakable. Victoria turned her head slowly, her dark eyes locking onto his. "If you touch me," she said, her voice dropping to a near sub-zero temperature, "you will pull back a bloody stump for the first time." A flicker of genuine fear crossed Miller's face. He quickly pulled his hand back as if he touched a hot stove. He tried to cover his retreat with a nervous laugh. "Just kidding. Geez, cannot take a joke." They drove for another 10 minutes, the pristine mansions of Maplewood Estates giving way to the more mundane architecture of the city proper they were not heading toward. The central booking facility they were heading to their local precinct. Their personal thief as they pulled into the rear lot. Morgan killed the engine and turned in his seat, his eyes finding Victoria's in the rearview mirror. "Welcome to my kingdom," he said. The station was a drab, 2-story brick building that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and had not been updated since. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and disinfectant. The booking sergeant, a fat, balding man named Henry, barely looked up from his newspaper as they LED Victoria in. "Got another one?" "David," Henry asked, his voice a bored monotone. "Another one," Morgan confirmed, shoving Victoria toward the booking counter, soliciting, loitering, and let us add resisting arrest. She was a real handful. It was a lie, but it was a wow that would go on. The official report, Victoria said, nothing. Arguing here was pointless. The system was designed to disbelieve her. "Empty, your pockets." Henry grunted, still not looking at her madam. "Hands are cuffed," Victoria stated simply with an exasperated sigh. Morgan unlocked one of her cuffs, leaving the other attached to her wrist. "Let us go, princess. Do not have all day." Victoria placed her small clutch on the counter. Inside was a wallet with several credit cards under her cover name, a high-end lipstick, and her keys. There was no phone, an intentional choice. She knew they would take it, and she had a different communication method in mind as Henry clumsily catalogued her belongings. "The door to the back office is open." A man in his late 40s with silvering temples in a perfectly pressed uniform walked out. His name tag read Chief Richard Morgan, David Morgan's older brother and the king of this corrupt little castle. "Richard, what is this?" Chief Morgan's voice was calm, almost gentle, which made it all the more menacing. He did not look at Victoria, keeping his eyes fixed on his brother. Just cleaning up the streets, David Sergeant Morgan said. His tone now a mixture of deference and pride. Found this one trolling for business up in Maplewood Estates. Chief David Morgan finally turned his gaze on Victoria. It was a slow, deliberate appraisal, like a rancher inspecting livestock. He took in the red dress, the cuff on her wrist, the defiant set of her jaw. A small, thin smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "I see," he said softly. He walked over to the counter, picked up her wallet and flipped through the IDs. "Agent James, from out of state." He looked up. Did his eyes meeting hers? They were the same cold blue as his brother's. "You are a long way from home." "Miss James, people get lost out here. Bad things happen to people who do not belong." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. This was not just about 3 rogue cops. This was systemic. The corruption went all the way to the top. The chief was not here to enforce the law. He was here to protect his family, his men, his illicit empire. Booker Chief Morgan said, his voice dropping the pretense of pleasantry. "And make sure you are thorough. Want everything by the book." He looked directly at Victoria, his smile returning wider and colder. "This time our book." He turned and walked back to his office, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Sergeant David Morgan grinned, re-energized by his brother's approval. "You heard the man," he said, grabbing Victoria's arm. "Welcome to Morgan's kingdom. The charges stick. The paperwork gets lost, and nobody ever hears you scream." He shoved her toward the holding cells, his laughter echoing in the sterile hallway. They thought they were burying her in paperwork, locking her away in the dark. They did not realize they had just locked her in the room with all their secrets. The holding cell was a small, concrete box painted a sickly shade of institutional green. It contained a single metal bench and a toilet, both bolted to the floor. The air was stale, thick with the ghosts of past miseries. Morgan slammed the bar door shut, the sound of the lock echoing with a brutal finality. "Enjoy your stay at the Morgan." "Ritz," he sneered through the bars. "Room service is a little slow, but the company is terrible." He and his men walked away, their laughter fading down the corridor, leaving Victoria in the buzzing fluorescent silence. She sat on the cold metal bench, the single handcuff now removed, and took a slow, centering breath. The initial shock and fury had receded, replaced by a cold, focused calm. This was her element. She had operated in far worse conditions in hostile territories, where a wrong move meant death, not just a fabricated charge. This place, with its predictable corruption and arrogant, sloppy antagonist, was a controlled environment. By comparison, her first priority was to establish communication. They had taken her purse, but they had not found what mattered. During the clumsy pat-down, Brown had been more interested in copying a field than in professional security. He had missed a small, flexible device sewn into the hem of her silk dress. It was not a phone. It was a single-use, encrypted burst, transmitter a panic button of a sort, but using it now was premature. It would bring the cavalry, but it would also blow her cover and end the larger investigation. It was a last resort, not a first move. An hour crawled by. The sounds of the station filtered in, the ringing of phones, the murmur of conversations. The occasional shout, she was cataloguing them, building a mental map of the precinct's rhythms. Then she heard footsteps approaching. Not the heavy, confident tread of Morgan or Brown, but a lighter, more hesitant sound. A young female officer appeared before the cell. Her name tag read, Officer Emily Turner. She was maybe 25, with wide, nervous eyes and a face that had not yet learned to mask her emotions. "She was carrying a paper cup of water here," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. She pushed the cup through. The food slot in the door. You look thirsty. Victoria moved to the door and took the cup. Their fingers brushed. Emily's hand was trembling. Thank you, officer, Victoria said, her voice soft. Non-threatening, she looked into the young woman's eyes and saw a conflict raging there. Emily was new, she was scared, but she was also disgusted by what she had seen. She was the weak link in their blue wall. They should not have done that. Emily blurted out, her eyes darting nervously down the hallway out on the street. What Morgan did, it was not right. No, Victoria agreed calmly. It was not. They do things like that. Emily continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. They think it is funny. They call it keeping the standards. Chief Morgan, he encourages it, says it keeps property values up. She shook her head, a look of profound disillusionment on her young face. I thought I was going to be helping people. This was it. The opening. Victoria knew she had to handle this with surgical precision. One wrong word, and Emily would retreat back into her shell of fear. You can still help people, Victoria said, her voice a low, steady anchor in the young officer's sea of doubt. You can help me. You can help the next woman they decide to put in this cell. Emily looked terrified. I cannot if they found out. Morgan would ruin me. He would plant something in my locker. I have seen him do it. I do not need you to testify. Victoria said, keeping her voice even. I do not need you to file a report. I just need one thing, and I will never, ever reveal where I got it. You have my word. Emily hesitated, her internal battle playing out on her face. She looked down the empty corridor again, then back at Victoria, the woman in the red dress, bruised but unbroken. Did not look like a criminal. She looked like a warrior. Maybe Emily thought this was her chance to finally do the right thing. What? Emily whispered, her voice tight with fear and a tiny spark of defiance. What do you need, ma'am? I need a phone, Victoria said. A burner just for one call. Drop it in the trash can in the women's restroom. I will get myself moved there in an hour. A 5-minute window is all I need. It was a huge risk for the young officer. It was career suicide if she was caught. Emily stared at Victoria for a long moment, her jaw clenched. She saw the cool confidence in Victoria's eyes, the absolute certainty of a person who was in control, even behind bars. She saw a way out of the complicity that was slowly eating her alive. Finally, Emily gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She did not say another word. She just turned and walked away, her footsteps quickening as she disappeared down the hall. Victoria leaned back against the cold concrete wall and took a sip of the water. It was lukewarm and tasted of paper, but it felt like a victory. The first crack in the blue wall had appeared now. It was time to get a bigger hammer. She still had her transmitter as a last resort, but a phone was better. It was untraceable to her. A ghost line to the outside world. She would call her direct superior. Deputy Director Thomas Clark. He would know how to handle this with the discretion and overwhelming force it required. The Morgan brothers thought they had her trapped in their kingdom. They had no idea she was about to call in an airstrike. An hour later, Victoria put her plan into motion. She began to complain of severe stomach cramps, doubling over on the bench, and letting out a low, convincing moan. It was a classic, almost cliché move, but in a place run by arrogant men who saw women as nothing but a collection of hysterical problems, it was guaranteed to work. The desk sergeant. Henry ignored her for a full 15 minutes before her groans became too irritating to tune out. What is your problem? Now he barked through the intercom. I think it is food poisoning, Victoria gasped, clutching her stomach. I need a bathroom, a real one. I am going to be sick. Henry let out a long, suffering sigh. The last thing he wanted was to clean up a mess in a holding cell. He radioed for Officer Emily. "Take the new Jane Doe to the restroom. Do not let her out of your sight." Emily arrived, her face a mask of professional indifference, but her eyes conveyed a message of urgency. She unlocked the cell and LED Victoria down the hall, her grip on Victoria's arm just a little too loose to be regulation. The women's restroom was a small two-stall affair that smelled faintly of bleach as per protocol. Emily checked the stalls and the area under the sink before letting Victoria go in. "I will be right outside the door," Emily said, her voice loud enough for anyone in the hall to hear. "Make it quick." The moment the door clicked shut, Victoria moved the small metal trash can was next to the sink. Tucked under the liner was a cheap prepaid burner phone. Fully charged, Emily had come through. Victoria's fingers flew across the keypad, dialing a number she knew by heart. The secured direct line of Deputy Director Thomas Clark. Clark was her mentor, a 30-year veteran of the Bureau, a man renowned for his integrity and his iron will. He had personally recruited her. Seeing in her a reflection of his own unyielding commitment to justice, he would bring the full weight of the federal government down on this precinct. The line rang twice. Clark's voice was gravely impatient. "Director. It is Agent Victoria." "James," Victoria whispered, her voice tight and low. "Code, Sierra Niner. I am compromised." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Clark, what the hell are you talking about?" "Your check-in was this morning. You reported all clear. The situation escalated. I have been unlawfully detained by local PD. 3 officers, LED by a sergeant. David Morgan. It is systemic, sir. The chief of police is his brother. They are running this town like a cartel. I have evidence of assault, corruption, and attempted solicitation." The words poured out of her, a compressed file of the day's events. Another pause, this one longer, heavier. When Clark spoke again, his tone had changed. It was no longer impatient or concerned. It was cold. "Where are you?" "Agent James Maplewood." "Estates Precinct. I am in a holding cell. They fabricated charges, sir. We need to move on this Internal Affairs Civil Rights Division. The full package." "Listen to me very carefully," Victoria Clark said in the use of her first name, sent a spike of ice through her veins. He never used her first name. "You are to stand down. That is a direct order." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "Sir, I do not understand. These men are criminals. You have no idea what you have walked into." Clark's voice was a harsh hiss. "The Morgan family. They have connections way above my pay grade, and certainly way above yours. I just got off the phone with Chief Richard Morgan himself. He called me as a courtesy to inform me that one of my problem agents was causing a disturbance in his town. The betrayal was so swift, so absolute, it stole the breath from her lungs. Clark, her mentor, the man she trusted implicitly. He had not just ignored her plea, he had actively conspired against her. He had been on the phone with the enemy. He told me you were unstable." Clark continued, his voice devoid of any warmth. "That you have a history of making false accusations. He is building a narrative. Victoria. And right now he has more credibility than you do." "That is a lie," Victoria hissed, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "You know, my record. Your record does not matter anymore." Clark snapped. "You have kicked a hornet's nest. My hands are tied. You are on your own. My official advice is to take the disorderly conduct charge, serve your time, and walk away. If you push this, they will bury you, and I will not be there to dig you out." The line went dead. Victoria stared at the burner phone in her hand, the plastic suddenly feeling slick and alien. She was alone, truly alone. Her safety net had not only failed, it had been revealed as part of the trap. Clark was not just a coward, he was complicit. The rot did not just stop at the edge of this town. It had tendrils reaching deep into the very institution she had sworn her life to the door handle, rattled Victoria. "Everything okay in there?" Emily's nervous voice. Victoria took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the cold fury back. Down, she shoved the phone back into the trash can, splashed cold water on her face, and composed her features into a mask of weary resignation. When she opened the door, she looked like a woman whose last hope had just been extinguished. "I am fine," she said, her voice hollow as Emily led her back to the cell. Sergeant David Morgan was waiting, leaning against the bars with a triumphant, malicious grin on his face. He held his own phone up for her to see. "Just got off the phone with your boss," he drawled, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Real understanding, fella. That Director Clark says you are a real piece of work, told me to handle this locally and to take my time." He unlocked the cell door and shoved her inside. "Looks like nobody is coming to save you. Agent James, you are not in the FBI's house anymore. You are in mine." The cell door slammed shut, and this time the sound of the lock felt different. It was no longer just the sound of confinement. It was the sound of a tomb being sealed. Organs. Words echoed in Victoria's mind, a toxic refrain of betrayal and abandonment. "You are in my house now." He stood outside the bars for a long moment, savoring his victory. His grin was a grotesque slash in his brutish face. "What's the matter?" he taunted, his voice low and intimate. "That look on your face, it is like you just found out there is no Santa Claus." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound from deep in his chest. "Your own people sold you out, threw you to the wolves. How does that feel?" Victoria did not give him the satisfaction of a response. She turned her back to him and walked to the far corner of the cell, presenting him with nothing but a wall of red silk and stony silence. Her mind was a raging storm, but her exterior was a placid lake showing weakness. Now would be a fatal mistake. Morgan's amusement quickly soured into irritation. He rattled the bars with his baton. "Oh, I am talking to you. Look at me when I am talking to you." Still. She did not move. She could feel his eyes on her back, burning with impotent rage. He was a bully who fed on fear, and she was starving him. After another moment of tense silence, he let out a frustrated grunt and stormed away. "Fine, Rod, in there. We will have another chat later." The moment his footsteps faded, Victoria allowed her facade to crumble. She slid down the rough concrete wall until she was sitting on the floor, her head in her hands. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical blow. Clark had not just been her superior, he had been a father figure, the embodiment of the Bureau's ideals. His defection meant that the corruption was not just a localized cancer. It was a metastasizing disease that had infected the highest levels of federal law enforcement. She was not just an agent behind enemy lines, she was an army of one against a conspiracy. She could not begin to fathom. Despair was a luxury she could not afford. She pushed it down, compartmentalizing the pain and focusing on the mission. Her objective had not changed, only the stakes before. She was fighting for justice now. She was fighting for her life. The burner phone was gone, a burned asset. The transmitter in her dress was still an option, but it was a nuclear one. Activating it would bring a tactical team, but it would also bring Clark's people who could she trust, who would be on that team, friends, or a cleanup crew sent to bury the evidence. And her with it, she needed a new plan, a new ally, someone outside the system, someone with nothing to lose, and a reason to hate the Morgans as much as she now did. Her mind raced through the case file she had memorized before going undercover. It had been thin, mostly circumstantial evidence and anonymous tips, but one name had stood out. Jake Kelly, a former investigative reporter for the local paper, the Maplewood Estates Chronicle. Kelly had been a rising star, a tenacious bulldog who had written a series of articles hinting at police corruption and financial misconduct in the city's administration. He had been getting close. Too close, then his career had imploded. A DUI charge, a messy public divorce, and a trumped-up plagiarism scandal had seen him fired from the paper, and socially ostracized, the Morgan fingerprints were all over his downfall. Kelly was a broken man by all accounts, living in a cheap apartment on the edge of town, drowning his sorrows in bourbon, but he was also the only person in the city who had seen the truth and tried to expose it. He was her only shot. The problem was getting a message to him. The hours ticked by. The afternoon sun gave way to the long shadows of evening. They brought her a tray with a stale sandwich and a cup of lukewarm coffee. She ate, forcing herself to keep her strength up later that night. Officer Emily appeared again, ostensibly on a routine check. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pity. "I heard Morgan on the phone," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible through the bars. He was talking to his brother. "They are transferring you in the morning to the county facility, but they are not taking the interstate. They are planning a detour. They were laughing about it. A detour, a quiet road, an attempted escape. A tragic accident." Victoria knew exactly what it meant. They were not just going to bury her in the system. They were going to bury her in the ground. "Emily," Victoria said, her voice urgent but controlled. "I need you to do one more thing. It is the last thing I will ever ask of you." "I cannot," Emily stammered, shaking her head. "They will kill me. They are going to kill me anyway," Victoria said, her eyes boring into the young officer. "Do you want to live with that for the rest of your life, knowing you could have done something?" She saw the flicker of indecision, the spark of courage. "I do not need a weapon. I do not need a key. I need you to deliver a message." She gave Emily the name John Kelly and an address she had memorized from the file. "Tell him the woman in the red dress sent you. Tell him Operation Phoenix is compromised. And I have the proof he will know what it means. Operation Phoenix was the internal FBI code name for her investigation. A name only a handful of people knew, including, she now realized, with a fresh wave of bitterness. Thomas Clark. Emily looked like she was going to be sick. This was a line she had never imagined crossing. But as she looked at the woman in the cell, calm, resolute, and facing certain death, she saw the ghost of the person she had wanted to be when she first put on the uniform, with a final terrified glance down the hallway. She nodded once. "I will do it," she whispered. And then she was gone. Victoria leaned her head back against the cold wall she had thrown. Her last Hail Mary, she had placed her life in the hands of a disgraced alcoholic reporter and a terrified rookie cop. It was not much of a plan, but it was the only one she had. And as she settled in to wait, she knew one thing for certain. The Morgan brothers wanted a detour. She would give them a war. The bourbon burned a familiar path down. Jake Kelly's throat, the amber liquid was his. Amber liquid, constant companion in the cluttered, dusty apartment that served as his self-imposed exile. Stacks of old newspapers yellowed in the corners, monuments to a career that had been systematically dismantled. His computer, once a weapon for truth, now sat dark and silent on his desk. A tombstone for his ambition. The knock on his door was hesitant. At first, then more insistent. He ignored it. It was probably the landlord looking for the rent he did not have, but the knocking did not stop. With a groan, Jake Kelly heaved himself out of his worn armchair and shuffled to the door. "Whatever you are selling, I am not buying," he slurred, yanking the door open. The young police officer standing on his doorstep looked as startled as he was. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she was twisting the hem of her uniform jacket in her hands. "Mr. Kelly?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Depends who is asking." Jake grumbled, "If you are here about the noise complaints." "My neighbors are lying. My name is Officer Emily Turner," she said, speaking in a rush. "Whisper, I have a message from the woman in the red dress." Jake froze, the fog of alcohol momentarily clearing from his brain. The woman in the red dress. The story was already all over the police scanners and the gossip mill, a high-end prostitute arrested in Maplewood Estates. He had dismissed it as another example of the Morgan brothers. Heavy-handed tactics. "She said to tell you Operation Phoenix is compromised and that she has the proof." The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Operation Phoenix. It was a ghost and a rumor he had chased in the final desperate days before his career had been torched, a whisper of a federal investigation into the Morgan administration. He had thought it was a dead end. "A phantom, where is Sheepam?" Jake demanded, his voice suddenly sharp and sober. "Priesting holding cell," Emily said, her eyes darting nervously toward the street. "But they are moving her in the morning. They are planning a detour." "Mr. Kelly, I think they are going to kill her." The fear in the young cop's eyes was real, and it was contagious. Jake felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, a feeling he had not experienced since the day he found a dead rat on his doorstep, with a note tied to its tail. "All right," he said, his journalistic instincts long dormant, roaring back to life. "Thank you, officer. You did the right thing. Now go. Do not look back. Do not talk to anyone." Emily nodded and practically fled from his door. Jake slammed it shut and leaned against it, his heart pounding. The woman in the red dress was not a prostitute. She was a fed, and she was in over her head. He looked around his squalid apartment at the wreckage of his life. The Morgans had taken everything from him, his job, his reputation, his family. They had left him with nothing but a bottle and a burning resentment. Well, tonight that changed. He strode to his desk and ripped the dust cover off his computer. It sputtered to life, a relic from a bygone era. He still had his sources, he still had his skills, and now he had a reason. The morning was grey and overcast, the sky threatening a storm that matched Victoria's mood. They came for her at dawn, not David Morgan, but Brown and Miller. Their faces were grim, their movements efficient. There was no taunting, no jokes. This was business time for your transfer. Brown grunted, unlocking her cell. They cuffed her hands in front of her this time and shackled her ankles. The message was clear, no escape. They LE'd her not to a standard transport van, but to the same cruiser she had been arrested in. Sergeant David Morgan was behind the wheel. His eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror arm, his smile was gone, replaced by a cold, flat expression. "Get comfortable," he said, as the cruiser pulled out of the lot. "It is going to be a long ride." They drove in silence for 20 minutes, heading out of the city on a state highway. Victoria watched the scenery, her mind a supercomputer processing every detail she noted. The make and model of every car, the mile markers, the exit signs, She was a living black box, recording the final moments of her own flight as expected. Morgan did not take the main turn off to the county facility. He took a smaller unmarked exit onto a 2-lane country road that wound its way through a dense forest. "Nice day for a drive." "Is it?" Morgan said, his voice breaking the silence. "The scenic route. Chief's orders, you know, Sarge." Miller said from the passenger seat, his voice laced with a nervous energy. "I was thinking about our new friend here. She is smart too, smart for a streetwalker, the way she talks. It is like she is a lawyer or something." "She is nobody," Morgan snapped. "Just another piece of trash that needed to be taken out." But there was an edge to his voice, a seed of doubt. This was Victoria's opening. "You really think I am?" Nobody, she asked, her voice calm and clear from the back seat. You think you assault a woman in broad daylight in the middle of Maplewood Estates, and there are no consequences? We are the consequences, Brown rumbled from beside her. No, Victoria said, a small, cold smile on her lips. You are the evidence. She shifted slightly, angling her body sewn into the cuff of her sleeve, almost invisible. Against the red silk was a tiny state-of-the-art microphone, its feed being broadcast to a receiver she had described to Emily. A receiver now in the hands of Jake Kelly. What are you talking about? Morgan demanded, his eyes flicking nervously to the rearview mirror. I am talking about the fact that you three are sloppy, Victoria said, her voice dripping with a condescension. You thought you were untouchable. You bragged about your connections. You beat up suspects. You planted evidence. You took bribes. You even admitted your own supervisor at the FBI. Deputy Director Thomas Clark is in on it. With you. Morgan's face went pale. How did you? Because you told me she lied. Bluffing with the confidence of a master poker player. You drunkenly bragged about it at the precinct last night. I heard everything. Every dirty little secret, the seed of doubt, was now a full-blown tree of panic. They exchanged horrified looks. It was plausible they had been drinking and celebrating their victory. Had they gotten that sloppy? She is lying, Miller squeaked. Am I? Victoria pressed her voice like a scalpel. Tell me about the Johnson case, Morgan, the teenager you framed for drug trafficking, because his family would not sell their property to your brother's developer friends, or the unsolved hit-and-run that killed City Councilman Harris right after he announced an investigation into the police budget. You think I am just a woman in a red dress. I am your worst nightmare. I am the truth. And every word you are saying right now— She paused for effect, is being recorded. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the sound of the tires on the pavement. They were hooked. They believed her, and now they were going to start talking. They were going to try to justify, to threaten, to confess. And Jake Kelly was going to get it all. The cruiser swerved violently as Morgan slammed on the brakes, throwing Victoria hard against the plexiglass partition. The car skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust on the shoulder of the deserted country road. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic ticking of the cooling engine. What did you say? Morgan's voice was a venomous whisper. He turned around in his seat, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped the steering wheel. It is a trick. She is bluffing. There is no recording. Brown grunted from the back seat, his eyes wide. Are you willing to bet your pension on that? David? Victoria asked, her voice calm and steady as she pushed herself upright. Are you willing to bet the next 20 years of your life? The panic was palpable now. These men were bullies, not strategists. They operated in a world of brute force and intimidation, and the idea of being outsmarted, of their own words being used against them, was a foreign and terrifying concept. Turn it off. Morgan snarled at her. Whatever it is. Turn it off. Now I cannot do that, Sergeant. Victoria said. It is voice-activated, and it is streaming live. My guess is the local news outlets are getting a very interesting audio feed right about now. I wonder what the headlines will be tomorrow. Maplewood Estate's finest confessed to murder and corruption. Miller began to hyperventilate. Sarge, what do we do? We got to get rid of it. Find the device. Shut up. Kevin. Morgan roared, his control completely gone. He was a cornered animal. And cornered animals are predictable. They lash out. He threw the car door open and stormed around to the back. He yanked Victoria's door open, his face inches from hers. You think you are clever, do you not? He spat flecks of saliva hitting her face. You think you have won. It is not about winning. "Sergeant," Victoria said, her eyes cold and hard, "it is about justice." The words seemed to enrage him further. "Justice?" he laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "There is no justice out here, there is just us." He grabbed the front of her dress and hauled her out of the car. The ankle shackles made her stumble, and she would have fallen if not for his iron grip. Brown and Miller scrambled out of the car. Their guns now drawn, the pretense was over. This was no longer an official transfer, it was a kidnapping, and it was about to become a murder. "There is an abandoned construction site about a mile up this road," Morgan said, his voice regaining some of its authority as he shifted into a new, more final plan. "Lots of deep pits, fresh concrete. Nobody will ever find her." They dragged her off the road into the dense woods that line the asphalt. The branches tore at her silk dress, snagging the delicate fabric. The shackles cut into her ankles. But she did not cry out. She focused her mind, racing. This was the end game. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Jake Kelly was listening with a mixture of horror and exhilaration. The audio feed from Victoria's hidden mic was crystal clear. He was recording everything. His fingers flying across a second keyboard as he typed up a live transcript, uploading the audio clips and his text to a secure server. He had maintained for just such an occasion. He had already sent the link and a frantic one-line explanation to his last remaining contact at a national news network. He could hear the rustle of leaves, the strained breathing of the officers, their panicked, incriminating words. "Nobody will ever find." Her cake's blood ran cold. He looked at the Jeep's tracker on the screen, a live feed from the burner phone Emily had dropped at his door, which he had instructed her to slip into the cruiser's trunk. The blinking dot was stationary on a desolate stretch of road labeled Old Mill Road. He knew the place. It was a dead zone, and he knew what was a mile up that road. Yeah. Morgan was right. It was the perfect place to make someone disappear. The police would take too long by the time they believed him and mobilized. It would be over. There was only one thing to do. He grabbed his keys and the heaviest tire iron he owned and ran out the door. It was a stupid, suicidal plan, a washed-up reporter against 3 armed, desperate cops. But as he peeled out of his parking spot, he knew he had no choice. For the first time in years, Jake Kelly had a story to finish, and he would be damned if he let the Morgans write the ending. The construction site was a skeleton of concrete and rebar silhouetted against the stormy grey sky. It was a monument to a failed development project, a place where dreams had come to die, a fitting location for what they had planned. They dragged Victoria to the edge of a deep, dark pit, a foundation that had been dug but never filled. Rainwater had collected at the bottom, creating a murky, stagnant pool. "Last chance," Morgan said, his face slick with sweat. Despite the cool air. "Tell us where the recording is going. Tell us who you are working with." Victoria looked down into the pit, then back at him. She gave him a small, pitying smile. "You still do not get it, do you? You are not the ones in control here. I have got a gun too. I have—" "Your head!" Morgan screamed, pressing the cold barrel of his pistol to her temple. "That makes me the one in control." "Oh, does it?" Victoria asked softly. And then she did something they never expected. She started to laugh. It was not a hysterical laugh of fear, but a low, confident chuckle. "You brought me to a construction site, you idiots!" Before they could process her words, she moved in a single fluid motion. She dropped her center of gravity, stomped down hard on Morgan's instep with the heel of her shoe, and drove her head backward into his nose. There was a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. Morgan howled in pain, stumbling back, his hands flying to his ruined face. The element of surprise was all she needed. She twisted, using the chain of her handcuffs as a garrote. Whipping it around Miller's outstretched wrist and yanking him off balance, he tripped over her ankle shackles and went down hard. Brown charged, bellowing like a wounded bull. Victoria, still shackled, could not dodge, so she did not. She met his charge, absorbing the impact and using his momentum to pivot, directing both of them toward the edge of the pit. For a terrifying second, they teetered on the brink, a grotesque dance of violence against the grey sky. "Wrong move, David." Victoria grunted, and with a final desperate shove, she sent him toppling over the edge. His scream was cut short by a loud, wet splash from the darkness below. 2 down on 1 to go. She turned to face Morgan, who was now staring at her, his face a bloody mask of horror and disbelief. The woman in the red dress was gone in her place. Stood a demon, a blur of motion and violence, silhouetted against the storm. The huntress had just revealed her teeth, and the last lamb was about to be slaughtered. Sergeant David Morgan stared, his mind unable to reconcile the image before him with the reality. He knew the terrified, compliant woman from the back of his cruiser had vanished in her place. Stood an avenging angel clad in torn red silk, her eyes burning with an intensity that made his blood run cold. Brown was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the pit. Miller was writhing on the ground, clutching his arm and sobbing like a child, and his own face was a mess of blood and pain, his nose shattered. Who are you?" he stammered, the words bubbling through the blood in his throat. Victoria took a step toward him, the chains on her ankles dragging and clinking on the concrete floor. The sound was like a death knell. "I am the reckoning you have had. Coming for a very long time," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Morgan fumbled for his weapon, his hand shaking. He raised the gun, but his aim was unsteady. "Stay back, I will shoot you." "Have already shot yourself, David," Victoria said, taking another slow, deliberate step. "You did it the moment you laid a hand on me. You, your brother, your whole rotten department. It is over." From the pocket of his jacket, Morgan's radio crackled to life. It was Henry, the desk sergeant, his voice tinny and panicked. David, where are you? The whole damn world is just lighting up. We have national news vans out front. We have feds kicking in the damn door, the live stream." "My God. David, what did you do?" The blood drained from Morgan's face. Live stream. It had not been a bluff, every word, every threat. The sound of Brown's scream as he fell. The world had been listening. He looked from his radio to Victoria, his face a canvas of dawning horror. In that moment of distraction, Victoria closed the distance she moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a woman in shackles. Her cuffed hands came up a blur of motion, striking the gun and sending it skittering across the concrete, far out of reach before he could react. She drove her knee into his midsection, doubling him over her hands. Still cuffed, came down like a hammer on the back of his neck. He collapsed to the ground, the fight knocked out of him. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with every second. Headlights cut through the gloom of the forest, sweeping across the chaotic scene. A beat-up said and screeched to a halt at the edge of the site, and Jake Kelly jumped out, tire iron in hand, arriving just in time to see the finale. He stopped, stunned as a swarm of black SUVs and state police cruisers descended on the location. Tactical teams in full gear swarmed the site. Their weapons drawn, a man in a sharp suit with FBI emblazoned on his vest approached Victoria cautiously. "Ma'am, are you Agent Reed?" Victoria stood over Morgan's prone form, her breathing heavy, the adrenaline beginning to recede. She looked at the agent, then at the chaos unfolding around her. The arrest of a sobbing Miller, the teams preparing to retrieve Brown from the pit. The arrival of paramedics. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "And you are late." She held up her cuffed hands. "Get these off me." As the agent unlocked her cuffs and shackles, Victoria's eyes found Jake Kelly, who was standing awkwardly by his car. the tire iron hanging limply from his hand. Their eyes met across the pandemonium. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a nod of thanks, of shared victory. The disgraced reporter and the disavowed agent. They had done it. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Morgan regime. The live audio feed was the kill shot. It was irrefutable, damning evidence coming from the mouths of the criminals themselves. Chief David Morgan was arrested in his office, trying to shred documents. Deputy Director Thomas Clark was taken into custody by his own internal affairs agents before he could even pack a bag. The Maplewood Estates precinct was declared a federal crime scene. The story of the woman in the red dress became a national sensation. Victoria James became a symbol of resistance and courage. Her torn silk dress and the story of her fight against a corrupt system captivated the country, sparking investigations into police departments nationwide. The rot the Morgans had cultivated in the dark was finally being exposed to the cleansing power of sunlight. A month later, the sun set over Maplewood, estates painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The neighborhood was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the sterile, fearful silence of before. It was a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes after a storm has passed, washing the air clean. Victoria James stood on the balcony of her glass-walled house, not in silk, but in comfortable jeans and a simple t-shirt. She held a mug of tea, watching the last rays of light fade from the sky. The house was no longer a piece of undercover scenery. It was her home. The Bureau had asked her to stay to oversee the formation of a new federal task force dedicated to rooting out systemic corruption. She had accepted her work here was not done, it was just beginning. Below her, the community was healing, cases were being reopened, wrongful convictions were being overturned, families that had been torn apart by the Morgans' reign of terror were being made whole again. Officer Emily had been cleared and was now a key witness for the prosecution, her testimony helping to rebuild the department from the ground up. Jake Kelly's career was resurrected. His exclusive story had won him a Pulitzer, and he was now leading a national investigative team, giving a voice to the voiceless in other forgotten corners of the country. Justice is not a destination, it is a journey, a constant, unrelenting fight against the darkness that day. Victoria had not just been fighting for her own life, she had been fighting for the soul of a community, for the very idea that no one is above the law and no one is beneath justice. The scars would remain on her and on the town, but scars are not a sign of weakness. They are a sign of survival, a testament to the battles won and in the quiet twilight. That was a victory worth savoring. What do you think is the most important quality for a person fighting for justice? Have you ever seen a small act of courage create a big change? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories give us all hope.